Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Laura Harris from NBC5. You know, Reality Check It was a social media campaign that was launched by the Phillips Foundation during the pandemic. So many things changed during the pandemic. But then again, so many things didn't change. And that's what we're talking about today. And that's what they've been working on with Reality Check It, working with Dallas area nonprofits and other organizations that are seeing problems, seeing a need, and trying to fix them. And with October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we are here today with Reality Check It and 4 fine women who are going to help us understand the problem and realize that we all can be part of the solution. So with that, we thank you so much for joining us. And ladies, thank you so much for joining us as well.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So the easiest thing to do here is to let you say your name, the organization that you're with, and just give us a couple lines about what you all do.
Sure. I'm Carrie Pascal. I am the Chief Investigative and Support Services Officer at the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. We are the largest nonprofit of its kind, the only one of its kind in Dallas County that serves the worst of the worst child abuse cases in Dallas County. So we see very severe child abuse cases, and we coordinate investigative efforts and provide hope and healing services for those families in our community.
Beautiful work you're doing.
Amazing, yes. So I'm Jan Langbine. I'm the CEO of Genesis Women's Shelter and Support here in Dallas, which is a full-service response for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. So we have shelter, and we have transitional housing, we have non-residential center, we have school on site, a legal clinic on site, just however we can surround women and children who need our help, who have survived domestic violence. We're there 24 hours a day.
Awesome, Jan. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Sue-Lan?
Hi, I'm Sue-Lan Chain, and I'm the Program Director of Victim Services at Mosaic Family Services. And we are a safe haven for survivors of human rights abuses, including domestic violence survivors, human trafficking survivors, and also we do a lot of work with refugees and unaccompanied minors. And so we provide holistic, comprehensive wraparound services, including, like Jan had mentioned, emergency shelter, transitional housing, case management, counseling, legal services, economic empowerment, trying to be a one-stop shop for survivors to come to. And while we serve all survivors, what we really are designed or specialize in is working with survivors with cultural or language barriers. We have a staff that speaks over 28 different languages and come from 15 different countries. And so we really try to remove barriers like language to accessing services.
Love that. Paige?
I'm Paige McDaniel, and I'm the President and CEO at Community Partners of Dallas. And we help children who are within the Child Protective Services system. We do that through their caseworkers. So we work with Child Protective Services caseworkers to provide clothes, shoes, hygiene products. That's our everyday 365-day-a-year job. But we also do other things to support the children and families that are going through CPS system, as well as those caseworkers who are doing that work. They are angels and heroes on earth.
And you all are angels and heroes on earth. As you heard there, they're just walking superheroes. I mean, the amount of work that you must be doing in a day, and we've heard these stories, we report on them all the time on our newscasts, but it seems like these numbers have gotten worse during the pandemic, whether it be domestic violence or whatever might be happening within the home, because everybody was closed together for so long. I mean, the kids were at home, families were at home, people were working from home, that sort of thing. I guess my first question would be, how on earth did you all keep up with the numbers? I mean, you already had so much to do, and then March 2020 hit. So whoever wants to start with that one, I'll let you go.
I'll start, and I don't know if it was your experience as well, but once we had a shelter at home order, our hotlines almost just stopped completely because she couldn't call for help if her abuser, she's quarantined with her abuser. If she's in the house, her whole job with the kids home and him home, one eye on him, and she was just trying to get through the day. Don't make dad mad, don't spill your milk, don't make too much noise. And so that was her life. As soon as, and I wouldn't say the all clear bell, but as soon as it sort of lifted, the whole first panic in March of 2020, it has been, our hotline has just lit up and has been full ever since. And another thing on top of ours is on top of our hotline is that in this past February during Storm Uri, when we weren't on any grid whatsoever. I don't know why they kept talking about which grid are you on. I mean, we had no electricity for a really long time.
Zero grid. Everybody was on negative grids.
I was on a negative grid, and they weren't interested in fixing that. So one of the problems was that our locks on the front of the shelter were magnetic, and so our doors were just flapping in the breeze. But
we had the same thing.
Did you?
Same thing at our headquarters.
At a place where it's supposed to be a safe place, though.
How vulnerable are we now?
Yes.
And no electricity and no
flooding and everything being shut down. Yeah.
But the other thing was our phones were electric, and so not based, they're just electric.
Yeah.
I had to have electricity for our phone, so our hotline wasn't ringing. And what we did then was kind of push forward a project that we weren't going to put forward until about a year from now, and that's texting. So we have almost hit a number to where it's the same number, 214-946-HELP. You can either call it or you can text it, and we're just about to the point where there are more people texting than calling. He's in the shower. I only have a few minutes. I'm in the restroom at a restaurant. Can how would I get help?
The desperation of a
I'm standing in the shower. Yeah. Well, that's what the phone calls were. But certainly, wouldn't you say the same thing?
Oh, for sure. I'm just going to say overall, the numbers to me are always deceiving. They never paint the full picture of what's going on. And I definitely agree. Like, we saw definitely reduction in hotline calls, but we knew domestic violence was happening. We also knew it was increasing when we were hearing from the survivors later or at a different time. And shelters were having reduced capacity. Everybody had to kind of, isolate or separate families or into rooms more. There was less space available. And what we also saw was a lot of survivors, they're having to focus on other priorities other than, unfortunately, their safety and the abuse. They're focusing on their physical health. They're focusing on their children. We saw survivors who, unfortunately, the shelter was just not the best fit for them at that time because they were really worried about the transmission of COVID or catching COVID or their children catching COVID. So it was a situation where our space was no longer even safe for the survivors in that moment. But I agree with Jan and just trying to, in that moment, adjust and try to meet survivors where they're at, trying to spend more time on the phone. You can imagine using an interpreter on the phone. It takes twice as long, 3 times as long. So we'd have to get on multiple calls. People would call and they'd, like you said, they have to hang up right away. So you have to be open to that and understand and try to reach back out when it's safe. Be open 24/7 for when they're reaching out.
And what courage for the staff. I'm sorry, but let me say one more thing too, is we found survivors that came to the shelter that when they could, that said he now used COVID as a choice of weapon. Sure, we know it's financial. Sure, of course, it's physical, sexual, spiritual, technological. But now it's like he won't let her wear a mask to the grocery store, or he coughs in her face, or he makes her wash her hands until they bleed, using COVID as a choice of weapon or of power and control. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
And I will say on the child abuse front, we lost our pool of protective eyes and ears out there when we went into shelter in place with kids not being in school. So the people that we rely on the most in the community, our teachers, our professionals, our professional reporters at churches, doctors, people who are seeing our children and the ones saying, hey, something's not right here, I need to report this. We lost those people in keeping watch over our children. And so we did see a reduction in numbers. But when we talk about what did we do, I will tell you the staff at DCAC, we didn't stop because we are an emergency response agency. So we respond with law enforcement to all of those emergency calls. So I supervise 2 large frontline service teams, our forensic interview team who responds with law enforcement and conducts all of those investigative interviews of children at the request of our police officers rather than law enforcement conducting those interviews. And then our family advocates who provide those wraparound comprehensive services to families right in the immediacy of the incident, right when it happens. And so we never stopped coming in. Some of our frontline staff never worked from home. They were there the entire time. They worked all through COVID, and we responded right along with law enforcement. And while we saw a reduction in numbers initially that first year during the pandemic, this last fiscal year, we saw a 19% increase in the number of kids we interviewed. And so what we saw was that initial decrease because we knew that abuse was happening. It just wasn't getting reported. started. And as soon as kids were able to go back to school, those reports started flooding in. And so now we're seeing those kids coming in. And we also screen for domestic violence in every forensic interview that we conduct. And so what we're finding is not only are kids reporting abuse that happened during the pandemic, but they're reporting the domestic violence that was occurring during that time as well.
So you're almost getting like information that's not in real time anymore.
Right. Yeah. And it's really interesting because when we're interviewing children, time frames are so important, so difficult for children to give.
Hard for them.
So hard. But we're able to use markers in time, right? We're able to use holidays. We're able to use things that children can understand. And the COVID pandemic has given us good markers. When you first went in shelter in place. Did it happen before that?
Oh,
Did
goodness.
It happen after that? And so kids are able to give us good time frames of when abuse started, when abuse was occurring, when things were happening. But it really has just increased. And what we really saw, because over the pandemic, while people were at home, so you think about all of these people being sheltered in place with their children, and they're having to homeschool multiple children with limited technology. Everybody's frustrated. People can't work. So maybe people's income has been lowered, and all of the normal frustrations of life and parenting and work and all of those things are now just elevated beyond the ability to cope. And so we saw an increase in physical abuse cases, and we saw an increase in the severity of the physical abuse. So we saw some really horrific physical abuse incidents of children, and those do get reported, not concealed, because people have to call 911
They have to.
when a child is not breathing,
Yeah.
when a child is dying.
Yeah.
And so we saw some really horrific things happen over that time.
Yeah. Paige, I want to bring this one to you though, because you have services, but you also provide goods. Like,
Yes.
I'm giving you
We're
this.
the stuff people.
You're the stuff
Yes.
people. And I love that, because what these three ladies just talked about, and I know you guys didn't get to see this, I always wish that people could see like a behind the scenes, like before something happens, especially like from television. But right before we started, all four of these ladies were like, oh, we know each other. We work really closely with each other, which is so important for my next question, because, okay, now they've done all this work now, Paige, and you're the person who says, all right, I got some diapers for you. I got formula for you, because oftentimes women won't leave their situation because they don't have the cash to do it.
We do that through the Child Protective Services caseworkers. And kind of what Carrie was saying and what everyone has been saying was the same with us. So the children were at home, our numbers went down, and now they're coming back up. What we had to do as an agency was change the way we were providing those things. And just like Carrie, our people never worked from home. I mean, we had some, administrative did, but they stayed on the job. We had to be there for the children, for the caseworkers who were coming in. Caseworkers didn't go work from home. I mean, they did their same work that they did every day. But what we had to do was change the way we did it, because we normally do a huge back to school drive with backpacks, and we fill them all with age appropriate supplies. We gather all those supplies, we gather the uniforms, we put them together. The caseworkers asked for them in advance for the children on their caseloads. Well, we didn't have volunteers to put together 3,000 backpacks with different supplies in each one. So, and plus it wasn't safe. So we had to order just packs of supplies that were already, prepared by some company in, Poughkeepsie. I made that up, but
Sounds like a lovely place.
Yeah, Poughkeepsie is doing the supplies. But anyway, we got all this in, and then we had the caseworkers just come and drive through. But it was just our staff, and we are a staff of 14 people. So it was a small amount of people to provide all this stuff that then the caseworkers are the ones delivering. So that's what happened last year. Now things have gotten more back to normal now, but they're still, for us anyway, they're still not back to pre-COVID at all. And part of what's happening with us, and I think we could all agree that there is a staffing crisis. You know, they talk about this being the great resignation time. CPS is having lots of trouble keeping staff on the job, just like every type of business is. We've had some turnover at Community Partners too. And so, but caseworkers, if they're not working, there's not as many children that are being seen and helped. And so COVID has really, really affected us in how we do business. And we're having to make some systematic changes on how that happens. And we were talking about people being able to work from home. You know, everybody wants to work from home because they loved it during COVID.
I hated it.
All right.
So
did I.
Do that anymore.
Yes. But so many people did.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not part of the job when you're providing direct service. I mean, we're all going to have some changes coming. We already do.
To add to what Paige was saying, you know, Paige's agency provides a lot of services to kids in the Child Protective Services system, which doesn't include a lot of the children that we serve. A lot of our children aren't in the foster care system, and so we provide a lot of those services directly to our children. So we have a large clothes closet with lots of in-kind donations that we provide. A lot of what Paige provides to her clients, we provide directly to our clients. And along with Paige, we had to get really, really creative during COVID, and we did. We have an amazing staff of very creative family advocates, and we had drive-through events where families could drive through, and we had, you know, safety packets where they had cleaning supplies and, you know, hand sanitizer and toilet paper when there was a toilet paper shortage. We were giving things away. We were giving restaurant gift cards and grocery gift cards and things that were in short supply to help our families, and finding really creative ways to support them during a difficult time when people were losing jobs, when people couldn't work. And we saw families struggling in ways that they couldn't struggle before. And when families are struggling in those ways, it's a barrier to get the healing services they need to heal from the abuse that they're dealing with. And so our job is to remove all of those barriers. And so every week we're trying to figure out how can we be creative in helping support these families. So we did the drive-through events.
Yeah.
We did drive-through backpack events. We did a drive-through holiday event. So everything we could think of to be safe, but also give them anything that they needed, anything and everything.
Really were in the same boat. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
because our kids are not in CPS yet, possibly, because mom has just grabbed them in the night and run out the front door, usually with the clothes on their back, and that it doesn't matter whether they're from Highland Park or Lake Highlands or South Dallas.
Because I don't want people to think that you're being dramatic. This is really happening. People grab their children
and run
out of the front
in the
door.
night with whatever they have on their back, but the clothes they have on their back. But again, it's such an equal opportunity epidemic. It doesn't mean they came from nothing. It means it was so bad they ran out without anything. But they're not in CPS and they're not in a police report yet. So we're getting them right at them. It's like the emergency room at Parkland Hospital. Both of us would do that emergency intervention. And so we have done the drive-through backpacks, and because they're meeting the needs of children that are different from hers, that are different than ours. And so we do the same thing. Yeah.
I actually just wanted to add that even though there might have been reductions in numbers of hotline calls or people coming to the shelters, it doesn't mean that there was a reduction of services being offered or work being done. In fact, we saw an overwhelming need at the time, especially from existing survivors that we were working with, that a lot of the progress that had been made before COVID hit, as soon as COVID hit, it went at a standstill or went backwards. It's like people who had been able to come out of the situation, been able to get counseling, been able to have good mental health, be able to find jobs, be able to support their family. All of a sudden they were getting sick with COVID, or they were being let go, or they were losing the stability or the income that they were having, and then they were having harder access to mental health care, counseling, services in general, community support. So I think that our staff, our amazing staff, I just want to say shelters didn't close down. Shelter staff were there 24/7, still providing services in person. But I felt like our staff was working overboard to try to accommodate to the overwhelming need that was coming out of the impact of COVID.
And risking their own
and
health.
risking their own lives, yeah.
There could be someone in the shelter
Exactly.
who had COVID, but here the caseworker is going home to her family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everybody had to take on more roles
Right.
and had to do extra, like you were doing services that you weren't doing before. There was so much COVID education happening because there was such a misspread of different information. And then thinking about immigrant and refugee communities, you're having to do that education in multiple languages, making sure that they're knowing about COVID, vaccines, you know, social distancing. There was a lot of time spent on just that alone.
As leaders of agencies too, as you alluded to, there was no one person giving us the information. So, right?
Right.
You were
That's
going to
for
piece it
everybody.
together on
Your
your own.
brother, your
Yeah.
dad's uncle, your
Everybody
Fauci.
became a doctor.
Everybody was a
Yes.
doctor. Yeah.
Everybody had an opinion. You had to like piece together.
I
Everybody was a
believe
medical
Dr.
doctor.
Fauci, but CDC
Yes.
didn't,
And it
then of
changed
course
every single day.
Yes.
So
Every
we would
day.
pull our senior teams together and
Yes.
say,
Right.
do we shut down daycare? No, we don't shut down daycare. Or do we move the furniture out and bring in pleather chairs that can be wiped down? Do we let certain people work from home?
Do you move everybody into a
Right.
hotel? Move everybody
How
back?
do we
like,
clean
back
the
and
place?
forth?
We
How do
can't
we
get
clean the
Lysol.
place? We
I mean,
couldn't,
seriously.
we could not get PPE.
Yes.
We couldn't get
That was-
clean, no wipes, no masks, no
gosh.
nothing, because it was going to first responders, and I think we're 1.5 responder, right?
Something like that.
They don't count us
They
as
don't
first.
count us as first.
But
I felt like we were begging. We were like begging everywhere. Anybody for anything. Yeah.
There was a bourbon company that actually, I don't know if you all got any sanitizer from them that kind of switched.
Tito's
from-
was even
We
doing
did.
it. Like
I
at one
think so.
point.
I
Like,
think you're
We did
right.
get some.
and we say all that to say, I think that it's important for people to remember that, okay, we're in a certain point in the pandemic right now where there are vaccines. We know a lot more than we did March 2020. But you all were doing this with your organizations when no one knew anything.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I heard people saying that they thought the air was going to kill them. So you're in a situation where nobody knew it. I mean, it was not something we had ever lived through. So many of us were able to say, well, I just won't go outside.
Yeah.
You all had to say, well, I have to go outside. We have to bring these people in.
Right.
That had to be scary for you all. I mean, I just want to talk about that part for a second, the mental aspect of that for you all.
I will say I have my team of forensic interviewers who could never stop. There was never, ever, ever an option for them not to stop or to stop coming in. And they have to sit in a room with children who have been abused or have witnessed violent crime, many of them human trafficking victims who have been pulled right off of the street out of a human trafficking situation. And in those sorts of situations, they're not in tune with their own body and their own health, so they're not paying attention to their system or to their symptoms. They're not, paying attention to their health and safety. No one's looking out for that, and they're exposed to a lot of people. We had a lot of COVID exposures, and it was early on when we didn't know a lot about the disease, and it was very scary. And so it was very scary as a leader thinking, trying to balance, we have children that we have got to protect. That is a commitment we've made to our community.
No matter what.
No matter what. But I have a staff who I care deeply about, and I have to protect them too. And how do you balance that? How do you do that every day? And it was it kept me up at night. It kept our leadership team up at night. We talked about it every day. And it wasn't just that team. It was many other teams that were having to have client contact. And I say that team specifically because of the nature of their work, and it never stopped. But man, it was a burden, and it was a daily burden and a daily struggle. And we had some COVID positives, and we had some COVID exposures because of their contact with children. And I will tell you that our staff, and I think you all would agree with this, we have such amazing staff. When people decide to go into this field of work, the heart of the people that choose to do this work, they're so committed. My staff said, we're good. We're going to keep doing this work. We're not afraid. We're going to keep doing it. And I'm like, that's great. I'm afraid for you, almost like a parent. You just want to protect them. But they were like, no, I'm coming in. I'm doing it every single day. It was amazing.
We had really good luck with, everything was crazy, but we had really good luck putting things on Facebook, on our page on Facebook. Today we've run out of toddler 3 clothes. Could anyone go? And we would have people go shop, donors go out to Target and put their masks on and gloves, and they would go out and they would drop them off, and we had a touch-free donation thing. And I'm sure all of y'all were doing it, but I have to say, when you can let people know what the need is, they will come through. So I feel like we were super grateful to have the Dallas community. I think it's the most generous place on the earth.
Can-do community.
On
It
earth.
really
It
is.
really
And
is.
so we received, I imagine all of us did,
Yeah.
checks in the mail
Oh,
that we weren't expecting.
Yes.
Or donors that would not, hang
Big
up when I
ones,
call,
too,
right?
yeah.
When I call, they hang up usually.
Yeah.
But
The
here
response
came,
was amazing.
Yeah, the response was amazing
Yeah.
without being asked.
And it was scary because we didn't know what funding was going to be like.
Right.
We didn't know
Yeah.
what that was going to look like in
Because
that
everything was
COVID
shutting down.
landscape.
Nobody
Right.
had money anymore.
Right.
People weren't working.
Right.
And it was the opposite of what we thought it was going
Right.
to be.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, but it was very scary, and I think we were all surprised at what it ended up
Exactly.
really looking like.
I also think that as service providers, we all came closer together and worked together better during this time. I just remember, we're on calls with the shelters, with Genesis, with Family Place, with Brighter Tomorrows, Salvation Army, and we're having these conversations, we're discussing our challenges, we're trying to find solutions together, and I feel like that has been something that's been really amazing coming out of this. And I just think our staff is resilient. I mean, it feels like, to me, it felt like we were building a building without any any plans.
Right.
You were just trying to build it as you go. There was no planning. There was no you just had to adjust. Every single day was a little bit different, and it definitely took a toll, I think, on all of our teams. And I think we're just really lucky that we had the staff that we had, right? And that they were willing and they were there, and that I think everybody probably tried their best to support their team as best as possible.
One of the things that we did, because we see such an intersection between child abuse and domestic violence, and when there's a child abuse case, families are mandated by law enforcement. They're mandated by law to come in and deal with that investigation. And so we screen all of our children and all of our caregivers for domestic violence in the home. And so, during this pandemic, whenever it's maybe not safe to reach out to a shelter, but they have to come to our center. So they're in our center under this umbrella of, I have to go deal with my child. I don't have any option to do that. We can screen for safety and address that. So we partnered with Genesis to have them come in quarterly and do some safety education about domestic violence with some of our caregivers to try to get in front of them in a different way when maybe it wasn't safe to go to some of the shelters and reach out for some of the services. So again, finding those creative ways to partner with community agencies to reach our families in ways that we can still be helpful in unprecedented times.
Yeah, literally everybody doing their part. Well, ladies, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've talked about COVID enough. So we're not going to talk about COVID for the rest of this conversation, because what I want people to understand is your job was very difficult before COVID. COVID just complicated it. And I think a lot of organizations within the Dallas area, DFW, North Texas, they all experienced much of the same thing. But specifically, I want to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month and what we want people to take away from this event. As I was sharing with you before we even started recording, it was never on my radar. Not because I'm a callous person, but because I didn't really know anyone who was a survivor of domestic violence. But then you start hearing people's stories and you say to yourself, wait a minute, this would have been easy for me to see, or this would have been hard for me to see, or oh gosh, that was something that I didn't know was true but is true. So maybe like the educational component here for those who are watching, let's talk about some myths when it comes to domestic violence and what you've heard people say where you say, that's just not true, that's not the way that goes. Why don't you look for this instead? So I'll start with you.
Sure. I do experiential expert testimony in court quite a bit, and one of the questions is, usually by the prosecutor, can you inform the jury of the myths that surround domestic violence? I think people think it only happens to certain people, that they are poor, they are uneducated, perhaps they are a minority, or at least don't look like me, whatever we look like, right? That it only that if she wanted to get out, she could. I think there's a myth that it won't happen again, and we know if he hit her once, he'll hit her again. There are myths around who does it. Well, he's a pastor or he's a professional guy. He wouldn't do that, or he certainly won't do it again. And that's another myth. That there's a myth that there's plenty of service providers to go around, and that's a big myth.
Yeah.
You all would know?
There's not enough safe
foster
beds.
homes, and
Not enough
we
safe
all know
beds,
there are
yeah.
kids living at the CPS office.
Yes,
So, yeah.
yeah, sleep in there.
Yeah.
So what other ones have you come across?
I mean, I was actually thinking what you said, Laura, that you were saying that you don't think you knew. I bet you did know somebody
You
who
for
who
sure
had
knew
who was
somebody.
a survivor.
And
you just
that's a
didn't
fair
know.
thing to say.
Right.
Which is, to that point,
Yeah.
look, I
Because we
don't
don't
even
talk about
know.
it.
And I
Right.
didn't even know.
Well, it's 1 out of every 3 women in the state of Texas will know domestic violence. One
There's
out of
5
every
of us
3.
up here.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
pick it out. Well, and if it's not us 5,
Yeah.
then we got 5 more behind the camera over here. So unfortunately, people think it.
I think one of the myths is that and people hold on to this, that it should be a private family matter, right?
Yes,
That it doesn't
yes.
it doesn't involve me, it doesn't involve the community. But if you see the outcomes, if you see the adverse effects on children, the impact on children, if you see the utilization of medical care, court systems, just the entire community, entire community is impacted by domestic violence.
Even corporate America,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
so many
exactly.
times that people
Jobs.
say, well, you just need to leave that at the door. But because abused women are working women, domestic violence goes to work. And I think the studies say between $8 and $10 billion are lost every year in corporate America as a direct result of domestic violence.
Yep.
That's not the injuries, that is the lost productivity, the absenteeism, the turnover. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think the other one that I like to think about is it's more than just the physical abuse. Most people,
Right.
that's what they're looking for. They're
Right.
looking for the bruises, the blood. That's what they think of as domestic violence. And so much of domestic violence, control, abuse, manipulation is all psychological, emotional, financial. Things that they're doing that seemingly look like I care about you and I'm trying to take care of you, that is just exerting more and more power and control over the other person. And people don't, you'd be surprised how many people don't recognize that as abuse, and survivors themselves don't think of themselves as being abused because they don't see bruises and blood. So.
Right.
I would like to add that there's a myth that if the children aren't harmed in a domestic violence
Right.
situation, that it's not child abuse. And I would argue that if a child is in the home when there's domestic violence going on, whether they see it, if they're in another room and they hear it, if they know that it's going on, it is in fact child abuse.
Such a great point.
And it is emotionally traumatic for them, and it can affect them long term, and it can, just contribute to a very complex trauma. And we have for years looked at it in silos, right? We look at child abuse as one crime, we look at domestic violence as 2 totally separate things, and we have to start to look at them as crimes that happen under one roof, and we have to look at them together in order to address this problem. It definitely is child abuse, and they're happening. We're seeing when we screen our caregivers when they come in, 40% of the caregivers that we talk to have experienced domestic violence over a lifetime, and 10% of all caregivers that we see, and we see over 8,000 families and or children and caregivers each year, and so about 3,000 of those are caregivers. 40% of those caregivers are reporting domestic violence in their lifetime. 10% of those are reporting in the past month. So 10% of those families that we're seeing, the children are experiencing domestic violence in their home within that past month, on top of the child abuse. And so we have to address it as abuse in the home rather than addressing them inside.
So then, to your point, that would lend itself to why it becomes generational oftentimes.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Kids who are watching and listening are getting on-the-job training to be tomorrow's perpetrators and tomorrow's victims, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's like the language you grew up with. If I grow up speaking only Spanish in my home, then I will speak Spanish. If you grow up speaking only abuse in your home, we shouldn't be surprised. I think another myth is just how people think it only happens, it's rare that it happens at all. And then you've heard us talk about the incredible numbers to whom this happens. Yeah, I think there are a lot of myths out there, and most of them seem to be set up so that, okay, well, that couldn't happen to me.
Yes.
Because
Or
I'm not from
victim
that
blaming,
neighborhood.
right?
Or victim blaming,
Or
that's
like,
another
like
one,
the why do you leave question always irritates me to no
Right,
end, because
right.
I feel like the question should be why is the abuser abusing? Why are we not asking that question?
Exactly.
Why usually it's always like, well, if it's so bad, she would leave, or if it's happening, or he, I guess it could be she or he, why is the individual not leaving?
People make it sound like, and I'm not being funny when I say this, people make it sound like you're leaving a bad movie. Like, you know, you go to the movie theater and you're like, I hate this, and you just walk out. That is not what it is.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's not that simple.
What I tell people to think about is, think about the person you love most and you trust most in your life, and think about what it would take for you to walk away completely and shut down that relationship. And whether it's your partner, whether it's your parent, your child, like you have to think of it that way. The person you care about most in the world, and all of a sudden the next day you're supposed to just say, I'm done and I'm walking out.
So I was reading this book. It's called Coercive Control by Evan Stark, and I thought it should be the core of the whole book, but it was, I just found it in one of the chapters, and it said, okay, there was this lady who, she's wearing the same clothes every single day. She doesn't go out, and she just paces back and forth in a very small space. So you look at her behavior, and unless I reveal that she is in a jail cell, you know, she is in prison, then you could then understand her behavior.
This is why she's doing it.
That's why she's doing it. Okay, let's look at domestic violence then. You cannot see these jail cells, but they are absolutely there. They are invisible bars that keep her in, and it's so easy for people to say, why doesn't she just get out? But it is the control, it's the power, it is the, I don't have any money, I love him, my pastor told me I'm not a godly wife, you know, I don't think I have any place to go. I mean, it's just unbelievable how many bars there are around her that we can't see, and we judge her behavior not having all the facts on that.
And in addition, if you don't speak the language, if you don't have any support system, if all you know, you don't have any support system, you're isolated in your community, I just think it is. There are community pressure and societal pressure that sometimes the belief is, you know, a bad parent in the home is better than no parent in the home, right? And a lot of survivors, they stay because of their kids. They're worried about losing custody of their kids. They're worried about so many getting deported. They're worried about so many different aspects that sometimes what you know is better than the unknown, and leaving an abusive situation is an unknown situation for a lot of survivors.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Plus another thing, there's a thing called the shark fin theory. As long as I know where he is, then I can help myself be safer. But as soon as I cannot see that fin anymore, how do I know he's not going to jump out in the parking lot at UT Southwestern Medical School and kill me? Which is when that happens.
And studies have shown that the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they leave the abusive situation.
That's right.
And there's a ripple effect that goes even beyond that. We partnered with the SMU research department and took a look at some of the data that we collected from asking kids if there's domestic violence in their home, and the data we collected from our caregivers. And what we found is that when a caregiver has experienced domestic violence, whether it's recent or in their lifetime, that the relationship between the caregiver and the child, there's more conflict. That the relationship starts to break down. And so when the relationship between a caregiver and a child breaks down, trust breaks down. So when a child is abused, the ability to tell their caregiver and have support diminishes, right? So then who do they tell? And if they do tell, if they tell a teacher, if they tell someone else, do they have a supportive, believing caregiver that is going to support them through the healing process? So it goes well beyond the effects that the caregiver experiences during the domestic violence, but it can impact a child's ability to be protected, to become vulnerable to abuse of all kinds, but also just to even move through the healing process when and if they ever do disclose abuse.
And
Here's
children
the thing.
cannot leave.
Children can't. They have no say.
I'm not saying that, you know, that makes it worse, but they cannot leave. And we know that there are confirmed reports of abuse and neglect in every residential zip code in Dallas County. Same as you were talking about, Jan, and you, Sue Land. There are children being abused next door to you, down the street. They're everywhere, and it really comes down to watching, keeping an eye out, making that report if you need to.
No, that's right. I was going to say that this is so. With all of this, what are we going to do about it? You cannot leave this on the steps of DCAC or Genesis or Mosaic or community partners. We all have to see something, say something.
Right.
You can't leave it on the steps of the police department or the courthouse. Everybody listening today needs to be a part of the solution. Do what you can with what you have, but do it with zero tolerance for who beats a child, who beats a woman because dinner was late. I mean, what kind of person buys a child? I mean, if that doesn't make your head
Just
spin
really
around,
angry.
right? You ought to be.
Right.
Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women in the United States, and once you know it, I don't know how you turn your back on it. So we're wanting people to clean out their ears, listen, know that you don't have to cure it. You just have to know 946 HELP and these other websites, and there is help and there is hope available at no cost, no strings attached, right?
To me, I say every person needs to take ownership in terms of how they behave. Like model good, healthy relationships, good, healthy behaviors. How do you treat other people? We're not even talking about in a romantic relationship. How do you engage with other people? How do you interact with people? How do you talk to people? In what ways are you exerting power and control over other individuals? So just thinking about your own interactions and are you being respectful and treating people with dignity? I think it kind of starts there.
But I went down a TikTok hole the other day. I was late
You're
to
on
work.
TikTok.
Are you dancing?
My gosh, right?
Dancing videos.
Well,
I was
alrighty
doing,
then.
yeah, I really was. But people are so angry right now. So the guy who, was turned away from the bank because he wouldn't put on a mask, and he is cursing and cursing and cursing. What do you think he's like at home?
Yeah.
If he's willing to do that in public, what is he like around his children?
Behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Oh my
Exactly right.
gosh.
And to Sue Ann's point, earlier, with a society who tends to think that domestic violence, well, that's not my business, that's behind closed doors. I challenge you to think about the larger impacts. This is your business. This impacts not just the adults behind closed doors, but this impacts the children. This impacts the greater good. This impacts society. This impacts all of us. It
So many
impacts corporate
intersections between.
it's bigger than just your business.
Children who are walking Harry Hines tonight.
That's right.
99% of them grew up in a violent home. Why is it safer, do they feel, that walking and getting into people's cars is safer than being in their own home? 98% of those people who are selling those children grew up in a violent home. There's an intersection between mass shooters. I chair the Dallas County Fatality Review Committee, where we honor people's lives by reviewing their deaths. Same thing that you all do. For children. And we sit around a huge table at the medical examiner's office, and we say, basically, there's schools there, there are police departments there, there are courts there, there are hospitals there, there's shelter there. And at the end of the presentation, we go around, did you see her, did you see her, did you see her, did you see her, did you see her? And the first 5-year report that we published, not one of those victims had reached out to anyone. And so I'm like, wait, we're talking about this all the time, or we are talking about this all the time, and not the police, not a protective order, not anything. So I was super depressed when I went home that night, but I'm kind of a half full kind of girl, and so I realized where there is intersection, she doesn't die. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to hold accountable perpetrators, make sure she is safe, but we have got to quit talking about why doesn't she get out, to your point, Sue Ann, and say, what kind of monster does this? It's not going to stop until abusers stop abusing. So let's get right down to it and hold people accountable. Again, with zero tolerance. I'm sorry.
No, and I think it's so different, and I think this is where we need to make real change at some point. In the child abuse community, we can make a report of child abuse, and no one can take that back, right? We're going to fight for that child, even if the child says, I don't want to do anything. We're going to say, too bad, we're doing it for you, because it's the right thing to do. And we don't have that yet with domestic violence, right? It's on the victim to have to come forward and report that themselves and say, I'm ready to get out. And we can't take action for her, even though we know it's happening. And that's where we have to figure out a different response, a different coordinated response, where we can help protect her even when she's too scared to reach out for help, even when she's too scared to not recant it once she said, okay, I'm ready for help, but wait, I'm too scared. Because kids recant their stories all the time, and we still fight for them.
Well, and then the empathy portion to that, because one of the things that I have noticed in all of the stories I have done before I worked here in Dallas-Fort Worth, I worked at a local affiliate in Tampa, and we would do a special about domestic violence awareness, and we would interview survivors about what happened, how they got to this point, to your point about, well, why didn't you leave? The crazy questions that people ask them. And I think the one thing that people can understand, if you're sitting at home, your desk, work, wherever you are right now, and you say, still, I don't understand how this is happening. Think of it as a broken glass. So you drop a glass, it just breaks, right? So there's like the really big pieces that you just pick up with your hand. Then there's those pieces that you sweep up with the broom. But then there are the pieces you cannot see. And they're still there. And if you're walking around with those shoes on, it's going to catch you, just like that. And so domestic violence is very similar to that, in that there are people who you can see what's going on. Those are the big pieces. There are people who you kind of see something might be off. Hey, what's going on today, Carrie? Why does it seem like, or people who have missed a week of work and nobody's checked in to see why she's just out before COVID. Not during COVID, but before COVID, she's missed so much work. And then I'm thinking about all the children you're talking about. Can you imagine how hard it is to learn, not just through COVID, but how hard it is to learn when you don't even want to go back home? So you've got homework to do, but you don't want to go back to that place. So that's what these ladies are talking about. And if that doesn't break it down for you in the simplest of terms, I don't know what could. It's not a matter of why didn't you leave? It's a matter of why didn't somebody save you? Why didn't someone say something, you know?
Wouldn't it be interesting, though, instead of having survivors during October, why don't we have guys, abusers? How did you get to that place? Who do you think you are? Why are you so entitled to do this? We talk a lot about, can he change? He can, but will he is the question that we should be asked. And there are 3 core beliefs that abusers have. One is he's entitled to have what he wants, when he wants it, the way he wants it. That's number 1. Number 2 is she's responsible for making that happen. And number 3 is he can punish her when that doesn't happen. Now, how do we change those core beliefs? Think about something you believe it is so part of you that nobody could talk you out of it. My faith is so a part of me, no one could talk me out of baby Jesus ever. It happened. It's the truth. So if he believes that, the entitlement and I can punish her, I don't know how we talk him out of it. But wouldn't it be interesting if that was the focus of Domestic Violence Awareness Month instead of survivors, this is what happened, this is how I got out?
Well, much like you, Jan, I am a glass half full kind of gal. That's the thing I like to do in my life. And at NBC5 we do a little something called Something Good. So every day we do a Something Good segment. Something small, something big, doesn't matter. But it's something to put a smile on people's faces and for people to realize there is hope. There are people out there who want to help and that there is still a lot of good in this world. So with that, I want each of you ladies to tell me a survivor story. Tell me a story about how your organization helped a woman or a man, because that's another myth that it's only women who are dealing with domestic violence. But tell us a story that will make us smile and make us say, not only are these organizations doing amazing things, but also the Dallas area is a place for people who want to help. I'm gonna start with you. Sorry, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's great. I have the perfect story. We had a case with a couple of girls, one who was horrifically sexually abused. They were young girls, and she was taken to the hospital. We got alerted by our medical team over there that there were high suspicions that there was also domestic violence going on in this home. The family came over, mom had a black eye. I won't go into all of the details, but when we dug into the case, there were years of domestic violence between the alleged perpetrator of the sexual abuse with mom. So the same perpetrator horribly sexually abused this girl, horribly abused this mom for years. There had been 2 previous removals of these girls. They had been in the system for years. These girls would get removed, mom would leave the perpetrator, everything would be stable, she would get the kids back, and immediately the perpetrator would come back. He had been arrested, he would get out, and he would go right back to abusing the mom and these children. And when we started to interview these kids, they were terrified. They did not want to talk. They were terrified. And I know that what was going on in their mind was, why should I tell? This is not going to help. We've tried this before, and I'm never safe. And we didn't give up on this family, and we continued to work with them and provide wraparound services. And eventually these kids were able to disclose what was happening, and we were able to secure convictions against this man. These kids are in a wonderful environment with their biological father and stepmother now, but it took 10 years of their life to get them to safety. It took 10 years of mom's life to get her to safety, probably more for her. But it was an amazing success story. But it was, we used this case study in training a lot on the intersection. And these kids had a hard time telling, because when a perpetrator threatens a child, if you tell about what I'm doing to you, I will hurt you. And oftentimes that threat can be empty, but when you see domestic violence happening in your home, you know that threat is real.
It's not empty, yeah.
It's not an empty threat. And he also physically abused them during the sexual abuse. And so they knew the threat was very real, and they knew that someone could die. And so it was a really, really tough case, but it was a success story, and these kids are doing amazing now.
Tell me he has been removed from the gene pool. Tell me this guy was taken out back and something horrible done to him.
He will never be able to harm anyone again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a
Thank
great
you for
success
that
story.
one.
So mine is a little bit different. Instead of one success story, I think it's thousands of success stories. Genesis hosts the annual International Conference on Crimes Against Women, where law enforcement, 3,200 law enforcement advocates, prosecutors, come from all over the United States and several foreign countries to hear the latest and greatest investigative techniques, prosecutorial techniques. A couple of years ago, before COVID, I was outside the ballroom door, and this detective comes running out. She had just heard this session. Dr. Andrea Safaris is the world's leading expert on aquatic homicides. And this particular detective from, I don't know, Hohokus, New Jersey, comes running out on the phone saying, I don't think she fell in the bathtub. I think he killed her. And so they go home with this new energy and these new ideas on how to hold perpetrators accountable in these random places. Alaska comes down from all over. It makes me so happy to know that a cold case rape will be investigated and by someone who cares. A homicide will be looked at through different eyes. And I think it is moving the needle on the way we address all kinds of crimes against women. And we are at no loss, whether it's trafficking, strangulation, homicide, sexual assault, domestic violence. But it really, there are success stories. There is help and hope, and I think we are moving that needle.
And I love that. Sulan, before you start, one of the things that I noticed that's different with Sulan's story and her organization, it's the language portion. Can you imagine, so I mean, never in my life have I had such a language barrier, right? Because I've always lived in America. The only language barrier I've had, and I can say this because I'm from Georgia, I grew up in Atlanta, and sometimes people's Southern accents, we were like, what did you say? Because we were from Atlanta, right? So that type of thing. But I never realized what a language barrier was until I went to Japan this summer for the Olympics. And I felt they were such amazing people. They were so sweet, but I felt so helpless. Something as simple as, and you know, we kind of figured it out really quick with Google Translate, but it's 2021, guys. But it was a situation where we needed to get on the right bus, and we couldn't find the right bus. And so we ended up on the other side of Tokyo, which, by the way, is a prefecture of 14 million people. So we're just trying to get to where we need to be. We weren't in danger, just trying to get to where we need to be. If I'm trying to save my life and I can't speak your language, so I just wanted to put that as the baseline here.
I'm glad you used that analogy, because when I do trainings, I often say, imagine if you went to a foreign country. I often use China because that's where my family ultimately comes from. But I'm like, let's say you go to China and you only know the person that you went there with, and something bad happens. Would you even know, like, what number would you call? Who would you go reach out to? And more importantly, would you even trust that they would be able to help you? What if the laws in their country aren't the same? What if they don't have laws against domestic violence or abuse or any of those kind of situations? So just putting yourself in that other person's shoes and imagining how challenging that is going to be. And I'm not going to go into a particular story, but I will just say our team and our staff does amazing work every day. Like we have case managers who literally will teach a person how to ride the bus. They will go multiple times, multiple hours, and teach an individual how to learn the bus system, which if anybody tried to navigate the DART bus system, it's not that easy. And so they'll do things like go to food stamp offices. They'll teach them how to, go shopping, bank accounts. They'll do a lot of orientation into American culture, American systems, understanding the laws, understanding their rights, and that's a lot of what we do at Mosaic with all of our teams, whether it's counseling, economic empowerment, legal. It's about providing a lot of orientation, education, trying to get them understanding what their rights and what support they can have in the United States. And I will just say, we see the impact our team has on survivors, because oftentimes after they have been able to heal, after they've moved forward, after they've gone to do amazing things in their lives, they continue to keep in touch with the people that helped them at Mosaic. They will invite them to U.S. citizenship ceremonies, graduations, like important family events. So that's the kind of connection that is being made, and I think I love that. Yeah,
I do too.
That's the best part, right?
I love that. Paige, you are last, but you are certainly not least. I already know a lot of your success stories because they end up on our Something Good. Many of you are the same way.
Yes.
But tell us something that just sticks out for you.
I had one just the other day. When you walk into our offices, we have we did a new building a few years ago, and we've really, because of COVID, I feel like we haven't been there that long, but with this, we're in our third year of being in that facility. But when you walk in, it is an indoor looking park, and we have a reception desk there, and there is the most wonderful, wonderful person ever, our receptionist named Dee, who sits there. And lots of times caseworkers come in and they have a child with them, and this is a child who has been removed from their home. It is not a great situation, but it is the only home they've ever known, and they've been removed from the only parents they've ever known. And they come in and they're dirty and they're just heartbroken and in tears. I have seen big old, 18-year-old guys with tears running down their faces. But this happened the other day, and it was just this darling little girl who was just dirty and sad. And so she comes in with her caseworker, and the caseworker goes into what we call the rainbow room, which is clothes and shoes and hygiene products and everything that the children need to make that fresh new start, moving into foster care or into relative care, because we help children at all levels of service: foster, moving in with a relative, staying in their own home, it's investigations, whatever it is. So the child walks in, and the caseworker goes to the rainbow room, and usually the child would go with the caseworker, but the caseworker said, "You just sit here, honey." So this little girl sat down, and she was just, Dee gets up. She says, "Let me get you something to eat," and It was taking the caseworker a little longer to find whatever the clothes she needed. And so Dee said, "Well, come over here and let me show you what I do here." And so she kind of did a little talk about work and told her, "I'm the receptionist," and she got her something to eat and drink. Dee said she never cracked a smile, never said a word. She left. About a week later, this little girl came back in the door, and she was transformed, bow in her hair, darling dress, and she went up to Dee and said, "Do you know me?" And Dee said, "No, I don't." And she said, "Well, I was here and you helped me." Well, I know it's just something very, very small, but to me, that says what we do. And it's what all of us do. I know as sure as I am sitting here that that child's life has changed. It's not going to be perfect. I'm sure it's not. She's going to have troubles, because we all do. But for that moment, she felt good. And she, of course, Dee was like, "Oh my goodness." So those things happen all the time. They happen to all of us, but that's my most recent just smile on my face.
My eyes are
thinking about
sweating.
her.
Yeah.
My eyes are sweating.
My eyes are sweating.
I appreciate that, Paige.
Yeah.
Ladies, you all are so very awesome. And I think that we would be remiss to not mention the fact that they do what they do because you all are all incredible people, but you also have wonderful people who are behind you. And a wonderful community that loves to help. And so for our final thought here, I want to go down the line very quickly. Tell us what people who are watching can do to help your specific organization.
We could not do this work without our community. And so I encourage everyone in the community to get involved. Go to dcac.org, find ways to get involved, volunteer, donate. We have events throughout the year. We always need volunteers, we need donations. We have holiday coming up. We would love for people to get involved, do a toy drive, donate to our holiday program, just get involved somehow, some way to help make a difference in the lives of children in Dallas County. Thank
And
you.
I think that would be the answer for all of us sitting right here. So I'm just going to pick one of those out. In addition, go to the website, genesisshelter.org. But I'm just going to go, money. I need money. I really do.
Be honest, Jan.
Yeah, I'm going to. I
love
need
that.
people to, open up their hearts and open up their wallets and, send a donation, whether it's $5 or 500,000. I promise you, we will put it to good use. So we can't do this without the community saying, I want to be there for you.
I'm going to say the same thing, mosaicservices.org. We have an entire page dedicated to ways that you can give back, a way that you can help, donations, time. I'm going to echo Paige. I'm sorry, Jan. Money is very important. I will just also say, educate yourself and become more aware. Learn what it means to be an upstander, not just a bystander, but an upstander. And I think knowing what to do when a survivor comes to you or someone that you know, is telling you about abuses going on, and being able to respond appropriately, believe them, validate their feelings. So that's what I think we should all be doing.
Well, you may remember
Money?
at the beginning
Money?
of this. Well, yeah, it's about
Okay.
money. You may remember at the beginning of this, Jan, we talked about when the electricity went out during the big storms, and that the electricity went out and the doors were open, and we have on site with us the night response unit. So caseworkers who work with the kids, they come to our office if it's after hours, and it's the cutest place you've ever seen. But we didn't have kids there during that period, but we will now. And so we are trying to find money for a generator right now so our electricity will not go out. And it's really not even going to run our whole building, just the part where the children will be, and the doors.
Right.
Don't forget the doors.
Right.
But so that's what I'm really focused on right now. But just like everybody, we
They're
do a
incredibly
code drive, we do a
expensive.
toy drive, we do all of that. But
Well, ladies, thank you so very much. This has been such an enlightening conversation. We've learned so much today. We understand that each one of us has to do our part, so thank you. And hopefully people at home have learned the same thing today. If you want to know any more or much more, I would hope that people would love to know much more about these organizations who are with us today. All you have to do is go to RealityCheckIt on Facebook or on Instagram. They've got a lot of information there. And you can also subscribe for their monthly newsletter as well. And I like what you said, Sulan. So let's say that one more time. Let us all be upstanders. Not, but did you think you had gotten in trouble?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Hoping I would remember what you said. I was like, wait. What did
She's
I
like,
say?
what did I say that
What
was
did I
good? So that we be upstanders and not bystanders anymore. Ladies, thank you so much.
you.
And
Thank
thank
you.
y'all so much for joining us.